Welcome to Koffee Talks with Dan Norton and David Person.
Take a look, Dan. Dan, this is what's called a golf clap. Clapping quietly on a golf course. Do you know why I'm clapping, Dan?
No, but I bet it sounds horrible for the people listening. Why are you clapping?
6,000 subs. Now, Dan, I don't even know what that means, but I saw your number go above the number 6, like a 0.6 point something, and I think that's a good thing. Is that a good thing, Dan? Are you happy? Are we moving in the right direction?
Yeah, that's definitely a good thing. We're going the right way. I think 10 is the next big milestone. So I'm a little way off from that still, but it's going to be nice when we get there. It's looking a lot closer than it was 2 weeks ago.
That's really good. I'm glad that it's happening that way. You know, my numbers that I look at are on Instagram, of course, because you do our technology on the YouTube channel. And I have been so stuck, you know, to get like over 8,000 or something. And it's just been this, now it's grind because everybody told me when you get to 5, it would go very fast. It's not fast, it's slow. But I think that YouTube has a much more capability of increasing very quickly when people find the content and like it. So that's great, Dan. And you were sharing some other good news. Tell me the other good news of the day.
I got a TCG Player affiliate link sorted like you were telling me to, like Codes and Cards Pro suggested. So the link to that will be in the description of the video. Plus, as I said, my Linktree, which I think is also in the video description. If not, I'll make sure it's in there. So if you buy from TCG Player now, you can use that link and give me a bit of a kickback to help fund these videos and stuff.
That's fantastic. Good news. Good, Dan. I'm glad to hear it. That's good progress. So Dan, I'm sitting here. I made it out for the next day. I don't know what day it is. Probably like 15, since some of these are saying 2 weeks. And today I had a dentist appointment. And if you guys remember from yesterday, if I could tell you how bad my jaw hurts, I almost went down in ready to vomit this morning due to pure pain. And the dentist said, you know, I don't know what's going on. Could very well be the podcast. She said you should probably take a significant hiatus. And I know most of you can't spell that word, but hiatus, meaning time off. And you know, from the podcast to try to make sure that everything is aligned properly. So haven't shared that with Dan yet, the actual time that I'm required to take off, but I am going to get through this podcast because I think it's important to honor my obligation to the OG of the information in the Pokemon hobby history. And then I'm going to tell one last quick story because everybody likes to hear my stupid stories. No, they don't. Why don't you shut up and move on to something Pokemon related? Don't talk to me. I'm doing a podcast. It's just a different personality. So we bring home 3 chocolate chip cookies from the dentist today. What, they give out chocolate chip cookies at the dentist? Yes, they do. So I walk into the hygienist and I say, I never eat one of these before I come into you. And she says to me, well, you should, because then I can clean it all out of your mouth when it's done. And I said, that's so gross and disgusting. And she goes, if you think I'm queasy looking at a cookie inside your mouth, I wouldn't have picked this profession in the first place. But we bring home 3 cookies because I would never eat them before the dentist appointment. I don't think that's fair. And this afternoon, before I could blink an eye, there was one left in the container. And I said to my son, we had a long discussion about it. I said, did you know, he said, could I have a cookie? And I said, yeah, have a cookie, whatever. And then finally, I see there's 2 missing instead of 1. And I said, did you have 2 cookies? He said, absolutely not. I would never touch your cookies. Well, I had an incident with my kids many, many years ago. We called it a Chocodile incident, when one of our very important last Chocodiles ever consumed by the household went missing. Chocodile is like a chocolate Twinkie, if for those of you that are old enough to remember. No kid would ever fess up to it. To this day, we call it the Chocodile incident. Luckily, my son is adequately trained that I went back right before this podcast and I said, I'm going to ask you one more chance. You get one more chance to tell me the truth before we have a Chocodile incident and my head blows off its systematic neck. And he said, okay, Dad, I had 2. So luckily I can do the podcast because I'm not so angry not to do the podcast. Dan, any food missing incidents in your life that you'd like to share with the audience that, you know, you maybe know something went on, but somebody wasn't ready to fess up?
No, at the moment, because of diets, me and Laura are on completely separate foods, so we're good. Laura doesn't touch what I eat. I'm not touching what Laura eats. We're good.
And so then when do you come together, Dan? If you guys can't touch anything food-wise, do you come together for like a Netflix movie, like binge watching a Dark Hallows mystery, you know, series? When do you actually get together? Because you don't share the collections, you don't share food. You each have 1 dog, although 1 dog at this point, God bless the puppy, has only three limbs. Where do you come together?
Well, we eat at the same time. We just don't eat the same food.
Understand, Dad, but that's not really. What do you do what is the thing that you fancy together? Is it you don't go to pre-releases with, or what? What do you do? Do you read
Yeah,
books?
yeah,
What
we
is it?
do. We go to pre-releases and stuff together. I just don't go to Pokemon League every week. In fact, this Saturday we're doing a two-headed giant Magic pre-release because it's a dragon-based set and Law likes dragons, so we're doing a Magic pre-release together.
Okay, nice. And I was surprised to find out, because you didn't say this on one of our podcasts, that she actually accompanied you to your hair cutting and style and coloring appointment, which we now know is like 3.5 hours long, right, Dan? She was there for you emotionally, and she was there, right?
I mean, working in the living room, in the waiting room, sorry, with a work laptop, not actually sitting next to the chair and watching me have my hair done. But yeah, Law was in the building.
Okay, that's nice, Dan. Good. That's how you keep a marriage together. Dan, when we release this podcast tomorrow, or when people are watching this, which will be tomorrow,
Yeah.
this will be one day after one of the worst market routes in the stock market's history today. So those of you that understand that, it was the worst day since COVID, and markets down approximately all the major U.S. indices about 5 to 6% in a single day. If you take the first quarter of this year and you add it with today, we've actually wiped out most of the gains that were realized in the markets last year in its entirety, and certainly all of the gains since Trump took office. And this is all based on tariffs. And you've got some of these pokey, YouTubers or whatever trying to determine if tariffs are going to hurt prices. It's all a bunch of malarkey. It's irrelevant completely to what we're talking about, or to any significant degree. But I want to talk about the markets for one thing, because I think it's important when it's related to Pokemon in the following way. This is a downward trend, folks, and it was not expected to happen this quickly and this seriously. But because Trump, without dealing with politics at all, he's creating a method and mode of uncertainty, and uncertainty is not good for the markets in general. And so there is no positive news on the outlook right now, on the horizon, because even if Trump takes back some of the tariffs and negotiates with countries and whatever, the method that they're going about administratively is to wreak uncertainty within the way they make decisions. And so how does that affect Pokemon? Prices are going to come down. I'm going to tell you that right now. And I'm not one to say that. I'm not one to say that in any way, shape, or form. So I'm not one to make predictions. And so this is just my opinion, but they're going to come down. This is going to be a longer term trend, that even if you have good days, a few good days, we recoup, 2 or 3 or 4% of the 6% down, then they're going to fall further and further. And it's going to be a meandering for a while until we come out of this, especially because it takes a while for the layoffs and the tariffs and everything else that's involved, the uncertainty and the trade wars, to work their way into the economic numbers. And so be careful more than ever regarding your purchases of Journey Together, of Destined Rivals, of whatever's coming. I think you're going to find at this point in time that it's going to take a while, but eventually these prices are going to be lower, and it's going to impact everyone in the hobby. There are so many people that are, they just live paycheck to paycheck. And so this doesn't necessarily hurt them. It hurts them at the grocery store. It hurts them at the gasoline tank, et cetera. But it doesn't really necessarily affect the psyche of what they do, until it does, until it goes long enough that it does. And so you buy a few packs of Pokemon and you buy an ETB of Pokemon, and for a while it will be okay. But eventually, the longer this goes, it's not going to be okay. The last time we went into something like this that was similar was 2020. I'm sorry, it was not. It was 2008 was the last time that something like this happened, that was potentially a longer term recession / activity. Correction is more than 10% decline in the markets from their highs. Recession is more than 20, and depression, of course, is much, much worse. So the last time we did this in 2008 or so, it took 5 years for the markets to come back. So make sure you guys have some cash set aside for your regular purchases. Make sure, if you have investments, I wouldn't panic out at this time. If they're good investments, I would certainly hold them and just wait for recovery, especially most of you guys are young and continue to do that, hold them. And then as we go on, adding to that portfolio as it happens over the course of time. You might wonder, as far as selling your stuff, if you don't sell your stocks, here's what's going to happen. We're going to go towards recession. And with recession, the Fed is going to start lowering interest rates. And when the Fed starts lowering interest rate, those of us like me who are making 5.5% on our money sitting in the bank right now, that's going to start coming down. It's going to go 5%, 4.5%, 4%, 3.5%. And at that point, people's money will rotate back into the stock market, because they're like, we can't make enough off fixed income for us to make it worthwhile not to go back in the stock market. when certain things like technology stocks are 25, 30, 35, 40% off of their highs. What a great time to enter the market if you're a long-term investor and you understand at some point things will settle down. So didn't really want to go too much into that, but I do think it's important. I think you should be patient with the Pokemon purchases, because especially if Pokemon is ramping up supply as the economy is in a downturn, there's a chance this stuff will fall much more quickly than anybody would have anticipated just 3 or 4 months ago. Dan, how does that resonate with you? I know you're a big stock market investor. Laura is kind of your financial advisor behind the scenes because you wouldn't let me be your financial advisor due to conflicts of interest. Any comments on that, my friend?
Well, to clarify, you're talking about, single secondary market stuff, right? Because at least we know with the tariffs outside of the US, product that you're buying directly from, stores, distributors, direct from the Pokemon Company International, we know that's going up. Like Canada recently announced that basically all new product was going up by 25%. So when you're talking about the prices dropping, are you talking about the stuff that either these scalpers or flippers have bought that they can't shift, and things coming back down to where MSRP is where you're going to be getting it, as opposed to, saying that Pokemon themselves are going to have to lower the MSRP price?
Yeah, not Pokemon at all. No, absolutely not.
Right.
Pokemon is set, and as you've said 100 times, they're not one that's going to get down into the down and dirty. They know there's so much room between the prices that they're issuing to distributors at versus MSRP versus scalper prices. I'm really talking about the scalpers. I'm talking about the fact that you can say,
Any secondary market thing, basically. Like, it doesn't just have to be the scalpers and quick flippers. You're talking about any singles or any product that's been held, anything that isn't being bought directly from a store. Like Target and Walmart, their prices are going to be the same. Potentially those prices are the ones that could go up, but it's the what people can afford to pay for extra stuff or anything outside of that is what's going to go down, probably to the point where you're going to be able to get stuff for MSRP on newer
yeah,
products
I
at
mean,
least.
right, and I don't know necessarily, like, if you include the tariffs and you want to believe that they're going to raise the prices of everything, which it's said that they certainly might. So then you have things that are higher in price when you go to pick them up, any cards and those kinds of things. But whether or not they're higher, whether or not they're higher or not, people's disposable income is going to go less in this situation. And so if they're higher even still, that just means there's going to be more backlash and people are going to hesitate even further. But no matter what, if we continue to take this decline that we're taking, the folks, consumer sentiment is falling rapidly, which is a measure of people's confidence in spending. You look at Amazon today as a stock. Amazon's about 35% off its highs now. It was down $17 or $18 today. People are anticipating, companies are starting to lay off immediately today. Even with the uncertainty of the tariffs and whether or not Trump is going to maintain them, the auto manufacturers started laying off people that build the parts for cars because they said, we have to go by what we see. And so if layoffs are happening across, the country, across the world, and I thought you were going to say something about the world concept of Pokemon and or other things. So let me put this a different way. Some people wonder if other countries will be less affected than the United States because they're not necessarily doing the tariffs like Trump. But of course, with the tariffs and with the reciprocity of the tariffs, other countries are affected.
Well, I did mention that. I mentioned
Yeah.
that in Canada, they've said basically overnight,
Right.
all new products, so all all Journey Together, booster boxes, ETB, even the blister packs, single packs, all of that just flat went up 25% overnight.
Right. I wasn't
And
referring to that, Dan, though. I was referring to disposable income in anything. So what I thought a lot of people have said, I know you weren't necessarily referring to this. A lot of the financial markets have said that the European countries, for example, will not be as affected. You should buy European stocks. And European stocks so far in the beginning of this year have done much better than the United States stocks. Well, that's going to change rapidly. It's changing as we speak. Because of the way that tariffs were implemented, people's money in Europe is also going to be limited as far as how it can go. So demand for Pokemon cards should sag there as well. That in above and beyond what you're saying as far as prices going up. So again, just be careful and be patient. Be patient, be patient, be patient. In my business, we call this the knife is falling. You don't want to necessarily jump in and be buying stocks even today. even if it's down, because as the knife's falling, if you try to catch the knife, you're going to get all bloody. If you wait till the knife falls all the way to the ground and pick it up, you're not going to get bloody. Now, you might miss some of the comeback. Maybe you're not going to buy those boxes, those Journey Together boxes at 120 or 140. Maybe you're going to pay 160, but it's better than 200 or 210. So just trying to give examples of things to be aware of.
I would also say don't buy Journey Together boxes at 160. I would say Journey Together is going to be available in huge amounts. Journey Together specifically, most stores will have deals on Journey Together or on booster boxes, at times where they're fully stocked, where a booster box is about 120. Because if you look at an actual MSRP on a booster box of 36 packs, it's about 160 something, which no store ever charges that really for a full sealed box. But whatever a store's prices were for boxes September last year, that's what I expect them to get back to with Journey Together. There's so much of it out there.
Yeah, and the same strategy with your Pokemon cards applies as to the market. So I've already said in a previous podcast, I paid $210 a box for my 4 cases. I put them away, and I'll just wait for them to return to the price where they will get once the economy is back on good, strong footing again. So,
yeah.
All right. So Dan, did you happen to see, I just want to make a different point here. Did you happen to see that there was a video of a Prismatic Evolution Super Premium Collection being open on YouTube?
I did, yeah. That product's not due out for a little while. We've got another Prismatic Evolutions product even before that one. So at the end of April, we've got the one with the EV pouch in, like the dice bag, and then the Super Prismatic, I think, isn't supposed to come out till the end of May. But yeah, I've seen the video circulating of it being opened.
Yeah,
we knew everything that was in it anyway, so there's nothing surprising. But I've seen the video going around.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll. I think it's going to be a good lead in. Let me see if I want to cover anything before it. No, I'm good. So I'm going to let that lead into the topic today, which is playtest cards, which is stolen cards, which is uncut sheets, which is whatever you want it to be as far as cards that maybe weren't necessarily meant to be released. And of course, the Super Premium Collection is meant to be released. They just got it out somehow early, and we're opening it in the back of a trunk or in the back of a car or something pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be it. It was at the warehouse, because this stuff already has to be at the warehouse. Anything that needs to be shipped out to customers or to stores at the end of May needs to already be in the warehouse, ready to go in the trucks. So that'll be where it's from. It's already left the distributors, and it's just waiting around. It'll be someone's just grabbed it from there. I remember I remember years ago, a thing happened where I think 3 days before the release of the final Harry Potter book, someone posted the last 5 or 10 pages online, because you could see it was someone in a distribution warehouse had grabbed one and just taken the photos of the last 5 pages and post them online, because you get your online clout, and it's same sort of thing. Back then, I don't think it was as big a thing with like Pokemon cards or anything like that, but that was one huge thing I remember from a distribution thing at the time, where it was the most anticipated product. I mean, one of the most anticipated releases of anything ever, let's be honest, the final Harry Potter book. And someone saw an opportunity to get some internet fame.
Yeah, it's just surprising that after this much time with Pokemon, and after this much stuff disappearing in a myriad of different ways, that they don't have some kind of mechanism with cameras and setup, and people leaving daily and checking their goods, et cetera, et cetera. So, and again, it could be somebody's best friend, and they do, who knows, but it's a little frustrating. So somebody asked me a question a few podcasts ago, and they said, my mind goes 100 different ways, so I got to get my thoughts. But basically, they said, what's the difference between the play tests and the uncut sheets and all these different kinds of things that are some kind of test prints? And they didn't really talk a lot about legitimacy and authenticity. They were just kind of asking the differences. But for those of you that are familiar, recently there's been a huge scandal in the hobby with Japanese playtest cards. And there's a bunch of different versions of them. I'm not going to cover them at all. I'm going to say to you, I don't do Japanese cards, but I'm certainly aware of a controversy where CGC ended up grading some cards that came from Japan that were supposed to be from 98, 99, from the creators of the very first set.
94.
94, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
The first set came out in Japan in 96. So I believe the story was that these playtest cards were from about 94. It was said that, I will say a bit of history, it's not like test print cards that we see in English, because stuff like the FPO set, they look very similar to Pokemon cards do now, just missing some details. Even, your Disco and Cosmos base set stuff, you can still recognize them as base set cards. It's just trying out different things. These cards looked completely different because they were basically presentation mock-ups, which were presented as, here is what a Pokemon card game could look like. The most similar thing is that the Blastoise in English that uses the Japanese CD promo artwork, which is printed with like a magic back, because that was Wizards of the Coast at the time saying, here is an idea of what we could make Pokemon cards look like. It's the idea behind them is it's similar to that.
So good explanation. And what happened is, and then no one knows really what happened, so I'm going to say that for the record, we don't know. But we know that amongst some of those cards that came out, there were some that we found out through people's kind of sleuthing that had been reprinted in 2024. They were not original. Let's just make it that simple. And people had spent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on how many cards they bought, either on eBay, either at auctions, either directly from the creator back then, Akabani, or from one of his several middlemen, et cetera, et cetera. And they had attested to the authenticity. In fact, Akabani had to CGC in certain meetings and calls, and they were graded, authenticated, and they were sold. And it ended up that many of them were not authentic. Now, you have to remember out there that there's this entire industry of people who want to get to the bottom of everything that's wrong with the hobby. So if you get on a blacklist to one of those creators, those content creators, you are so busted. You're going to be, if your whole family dies in a car crash, they're going to find a way to blame that on you. So I'm not going to get into who's to blame and who knows. I don't know anything about it. I have no idea about any of that. But I'm going to talk about the cards that I've acquired and where they've come from, since that's what the question was about. 99% of all of the test print variants that have come to me or I've acquired have come from uncut sheets. Okay? It is very different. As Dan can explain, those play test cards were all already cut. They were cut, they were mounted, they were other things, they were single cards. But the cards that I've obtained, like the base set Disco Hollows, the base set Cosmos Hollows. And again, for those of you that doesn't make a lot of sense, we can explain that there. Dan, explain what Disco Hollows or Cosmos Hollows are so I can just give context to what we're talking about.
Well, so Disco Hollow is just another type of foiling that was never used in Pokemon. The sheets would have been, as they were preparing for base set, they would have tried a few different types of foils to say which one do we want to go with, which one is going to look best. And they settled on, I think the name that people use right now is the Starlight or Galaxy foil for the original Pokemon foiling, and then they switched to Cosmos foil. I think it was base set 2, because you have a full set of fossil cards, a full set of fossil hollows and base hollows with Cosmos foil, and you have the two. Do you have both the jungle theme deck cards with the Cosmos foil? I know you have the Vaporeon. I can't remember if you ever got the Kangaskhan, but they exist. They exist out there with Cosmos foiling, because when they decided they were going to switch to Cosmos foiling, it has to happen early enough on in the process, that they can't wait until they've got the new set design to start testing foils, so they test it on existing sets. And again, these are sheets that are never meant to be distributed. I will say the fossil ones you didn't get from a sheet. The fossil ones.
Well, let me leave that for a second, because I'm going to talk about that. But I want you to explain that it's this concept of testing a different hollow pattern, right?
Yeah, and this would be stuff that, again, it was made by manufacturers. They wouldn't have made a ton of sheets. It would have been, here are a couple of sheets for you guys to go over and review, send it back to Wizards of the Coast. Do you like this? Or do you prefer this one? We'll give the stamp of approval on this one. Go ahead with the print run. So these sheets were never intended for anyone outside of Wizards of the Coast to get them. Probably things where the official line is you're supposed to destroy them, but some people from WotC hung on to them. Higher ups, they want to take them home. Maybe they want to frame them. Maybe it's just a nice memento. And then eventually, years later, they get put onto the secondary market. Once prices start exploding, people realize that, oh, well, we haven't worked for this company for 10 years. There's nothing they're going to do now. Let's make some money off this. And that's how they end up getting out even though they're not supposed to.
Yeah, exactly. So I appreciate the explanation. And so let me give you a quick example, just a way, for example, when I was in the sports card industry 100 years ago, in fact, it was 1988 or 1989 when Upper Deck was first originated as a company, I got a whole bunch of Upper Deck uncut sheets with the Ken Griffey rookie on them. And at that time, they were tremendously popular and hot. There were people, because it was the first year of the company, the cards were such a higher quality than everything else, and everybody was coming from everywhere to acquire the sheets. Well, it ended up years later that they said, the sheets should not have been handed out, or whatever they said. I don't even remember. And it's so like then those sheets became a hot commodity because they were out there when they should necessarily not have been. So going back to Pokemon, some of these creators, some of these people had sheets, and as Dan said, the market gets hot, the money goes up, and they start to put them out on the market. In my experience, the most obscure of the base set sheets is the Cosmos Hollow. It is not the most popular. The Disco Hollow pattern is the one that everybody likes aesthetically, but the Cosmos Hollow is the one where I don't know if I've known of more than one or two sheets that were actually held up. And how did I find out? Well, David, how do you know? Because luckily, fortunately, being where I am in the hobby, people know of my collection. And so people come out of the woodwork and say, hey, would you be interested in this? Or in another different situation, and Dan has a great video on this on his channel. I don't know if it's Coffee, it's probably Coffee Talks as well. But we did a video on a cutting of a disco sheet, maybe?
Yeah, you talked about it, about the process behind you getting that sheet, you and the other owners of that sheet having it cut so that each of you could take a set of the cards.
Right. So that's a really incredible video that we did detailed analysis. And what we chose to do, I was able to find somebody who had the capability to cut the sheet in a very good way, in a very accurate way that the cards would be maintained their integrity. But when we chose to cut them, this was not my choice. This was the person who cut them. He insisted that we leave them as square cornered. So that way they would be able to differentiate that we were not trying to hide anything in the hobby and try to say they were round corner cards. So we just, the ethics of it to us was make sure that by being square cornered, you knew they were cut off an uncut sheet. And that was the way I was able to get that set and a similar set. So then I was able to get a different sheet that was cut, the Cosmos Hollows. But all of that was, we say, hey, there's only a handful of those sheets that we are known to exist. They actually had all the writing on the borders of them that came from the people that were there to approve them back in 1998, 1999. And the reason I bring that up is because that's the provenance piece of this. You need both. You need some kind of history behind it. Dan will mention something on the pre-release in a minute, right? But you need some provenance. Plus, you need to actually look at the cards when they're cut and make sure the materials they're made out of are actual, stuff from back then. So why do I mention this? Because there's a shadowless sheet right now that's out on Facebook. And it's not a test sheet at all. It's just a shadowless sheet. It's sort of like an uncut sheet of shadowless that somebody's had put aside. And I guess it was somebody, I don't know the names from back then, but he was well known. And he actually wrote a letter of authenticity saying this was my sheet. And I got it for my kids. And then my kids, want to sell it now if they can get enough money. And EA Collectibles bought it and they're selling it out there for some outrageous price. But I love EA Collectibles, but they're going to sell it for whatever they want. So $320,000, I think, is the asking price. And that's something like that. You wouldn't necessarily cut it. You could cut it. It's in great shape, but there's no reason to, right? If you wanted to cut it and put square corners and let people buy the Charizards or whatever, that's one thing. There's nothing
because the cards, the cards aren't unique. The cards are shadowless cards. This was
correct.
A sheet
and
that
if you were to pay $300,000
Yeah.
and cut them, you're not necessarily going to get your money back. You may or may not. I don't know what those prices of those cards go by. But provenance, along with authenticity, makes a big difference. And having uncut sheets is one way of knowing, and I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, of knowing something that someone else doesn't know when all these single cards come out, just because it's so hard to cut these sheets in an accurate way. So Dan, talk about that, but also throw in the comment where somebody told you on one of our videos recently that
Sure.
they saw another pre-release Raichu.
Well, so yeah, the provenance and authenticity thing ties back really well to those Japanese playtest cards from CGC. Because what actually happened is, during people's research into this, it was also proved that some amount of those cards were legit and were from 1994. Weirdly, the people who talk about that a lot, who like to throw the drama channels around, who hate CGC, fail to mention that bit most of the time. They just talk about the fakes. Oh well. But what seems to have happened is on that first batch of cards, CGC did the test of the provenance and the authenticity of the actual cards, and then for any future grading, just went by the provenance of Akabane. So they neglected to actually do the card tests really on every future copy once they'd confirmed that some were definitely authentic. That seems to be the way it went down, but they've also put too much stock in just what Akabane's saying. They took him at his word, basically. Obviously, to clear that up, CGC is now asking for all those cards back and are in the process of insurance and paying out to people who paid for those. That's an ongoing thing. We'll probably talk more about that when it's all concluded and CGC have made some sort of final statement. But yeah, that's why you need both parts of that. You can't just say, yes, we trust this person. You have to also look at the card stock. Like, we look at the pre-release Raichu. Obviously, you had all of the provenance on yours, one from Mike Boozer, one from another employee, and you had all these signed letters and stuff. But if when they looked at it, they went, this is clearly a fake base set Raichu, it doesn't matter how much provenance you have, it's clearly wrong. Like, if yours was, say, shadowless or something, like if you had a shadowless one that had a perfect pre-release stamp on it, that should flag up, and that should be the knowledge to people of, well, no, even with all this writing, we know that that's wrong, because we know it should be an unlimited print. So that's why you have to go through both of them. There was a comment, like David mentioned, on the pre-release Raichu video we did a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of days ago, sorry, where someone mentioned that one had been posted on Reddit. And I went and had a look, and I looked through the comments, and honestly, the card looks good. The card looks to be an authentic base set Raichu. The pre-release stamp does look to match up with what you would expect from a pre-release Clefable. Obviously, without holding it in person, that's something that I couldn't fully say the stamp looks totally correct, because there's a lot of stuff you have to see in person with that. But when they were asked about it in the comments, their story behind finding it was, oh, it was in a box at my aunt's house. I had a collection as a kid, I put it in there. And as I replied to the comment, I said the biggest thing again is you now need the provenance for it. If they can tie themselves or tie their aunt even to someone who worked at WotC and go, oh, well, or even a friend of a friend, go, oh, my aunt got some cards from her friend. The friend knew this person who worked at WotC. If you can even get that information, then people can start to ask questions. People can then reach out to the person at WotC, or they can look through historical posts on PokeGym and go, oh, the person that they mentioned, do we ever know that they owned a pre-release Raichu? Well, if they did, can we contact them? Can we ask them if they still have theirs? Can we ask if they ever gave it to this person? If they did, can we then contact that person? Will that person confirm anything following the chain down? But just saying I found it in a box at my aunt's house isn't going to cut it. You need to start. At least need to make some effort yourself to start building that provenance chain. And if you can't get it, the card is nothing, unfortunately. Like, even if your aunt did legitimately get it from someone from WotC, if you can't follow that chain back and you can't figure out who, you don't have a pre-release Raichu, unfortunately.
Well, and people are going to be more reluctant. Grading companies are getting more and more reluctant to grade this stuff. I'm not saying that, people say, well, CGC will grade everything. I don't grade my cards. Again, I have to buy them graded if they come graded, if I need a level of authenticity, but it isn't what I look for. And so there's definitely going to be some trepidation by these companies if they're worried about getting called out on something. I think, and I hope that they'll be more accurate in their process of going through. With AI, things are interesting too. We talked for a couple of years ago, probably, about the fact that all of my copies, I own the only one who've ever showed a pre-release Raichu before one was sold. One, they were graded, and one went to Rusty. And so it's interesting to note whether or not there's photos of mine, which we know were pilfered back when someone who's not a friend of either of ours anymore came to my house and took pictures and plastered them all over the internet. And so with AI and your ability in Photoshop and everything else, you can always put something out there just for views, almost like you said, something gets stolen from the factory in the super premium collection just for views, to make something act like someone has something, and we don't even really know if they have the card in their possession. So you can make it look like, put your hand out and stick a card inside and nobody would know. So there's just other levels you have to go to, which makes sense in what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, for the Reddit post, really the easiest way for someone to fake a pre-release Raichu for a Reddit post would be to recreate the stamp and put it on a legitimate Raichu. Like, that's the easiest way to go about that, which is why, as we said, for the pre-release Raichu, a lot of the standard actual like testing of cards that they do don't work just on the Raichu, like stuff like the FPO set where it is different to any card ever printed. The Raichu is just a stamp on an existing card. So if you're trying to fake it, the fake stamp is where it comes in. Like with things like the FPOs, even though we do have provenance on basically all of them, the provenance isn't as much of a big deal there because it's so much harder to fake the actual card. Like a lot of the card tests, like I know there are a lot of FPOs graded, and some of them they won't grade anymore. But you don't have to say, if you're buying an FPO, you don't have to say, "Oh, I need to know every purchase along the chain back to Rusty when he got it from Watsy." You can still authenticate the card in other ways that you can't really do with the pre-release Raichu because of it being a stamp.
So I'm going to tell Dan. Dan's going to do you guys a favor. He's going to put a link in this video to the video that we did on Koffee Talks a year or so ago, whatever, maybe longer now. Time flies when you're getting old. About the process where I went through to drive across the country, how I acquired a sheet, how I got it cut, how a trade happened for me to also end up with Discos and Cosmos from the base set that I really wanted to put into my collection because, again, I was trying to round out every single card. Focus primarily on the backs of the cards, right? I've never been so interested in the Blastoise card with a magic back because it doesn't have a Pokemon back. So that was my main focus. Now, going forward, after I acquired both of those, there was still something I didn't have. And I've learned about this as I've continued to be in the hobby. I didn't understand how rare these other things were. So one of the most rare things I never have and never realized were there was these fossil Cosmos holo cards. So there was someone that had the set. I'm not allowed to name the name because Dan will beat me and censor me. But somebody who was well known in the hobby, who had a set, would never agree to sell it and would never agree to sell it at any kind of reasonable price. But due to some business things that were going on, and as things happened, I was able to acquire the set, make a deal with the cards, and bought them. And so I was able to get a an entire blueback set of the fossil cards, the holos in the Cosmos pattern. And that was one of the most difficult sets for me to acquire to date. Where did those cards come from? If you were to listen to that person, who I'm not allowed to say the name because Dan limits me, they would tell you that they bought them off of a Watsy employee years and years ago, where they had some extras and they were put aside and whatever. It is not. There are others that believe, and people that I trust more than that person who I bought them from, who believe that in fact they came off an uncut sheet. But that back in the day back then, you could cut those sheets, that you could actually cut them to manufacturer specifications through Wizards of the Coast and their people. And that's what we think happened, and we're pretty confident about that. And again, we chose not to do that with the base set Cosmos and Discos. We chose to be ethical and actually say where they came from. And we think in this situation that was not done. These were cut and look just like regular cards.
To be clear, what you're meaning on the difference is they have rounded corners, is where the difference is. They cut the sheet and they rounded the corners of these fossil Cosmos to make them look exactly like regular cards.
That Dan is correct. Thank you, Dan. And they were actually all graded by PSA. Okay, so those cards are all graded by PSA. It's a fully graded set. I don't think they would do it today. I don't know that. I don't know anything about grading, but from what I hear on the streets, I'm just not sure they would do it today, PSA, with all that's going on.
Depends who submits them.
Okay, fair enough, Dan. I'm not going to debate Dan on anything he says relative to Pokemon and in the intricacies and inner workings.
I just think PSA will grade stuff for some people they wouldn't grade for others. And I don't think that's a secret.
It makes totally sense, specifically in this instance as well. So now I have this full set. And what happened is, along the way, in the last year that I was able to acquire the set, about the same time that was happening, I found somebody else who'd been out there trying to collect this set forever. And they're, error type collectors, or whatever you want to call these variants, test prints. And so this person, a wonderful person whose name I just won't mention just for confidentiality reasons. He was looking to sell the set he'd accumulated, which is a set of the same cards in more varied grades and from a variety of different companies. And actually have that set up for sale on eBay right now. I've had it out there for a while. And I got that much less expensively than the other set because just because they're not the same grades and they're more varied in their grading. And I paid too much for the set from the influencer I bought the PSA 8 or 9 set from. I think it's all PSA 8s because I really wanted it and didn't know I was going to have anything else available to me. So that was one of the very most, if not the most rare of the Cosmos, hollows that I got, and that was relative to the fossil set. Now we have base and we have fossil covered, and Dan's going to explain this to you. As I'm finishing up that project, I find out that there's 2 more cards that have a different hollow pattern, and they are from the Jungle set, and they are Vaporeon and, if I'm right, Kangaskhan. Am I right, Dan?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so, Dan, just talk about those, and then I'll round out with why just those 2 cards from that set, or you can round that out.
Yeah. So again, this would have been a test print, a test of the Cosmos foil. There was never any full jungle release with the Cosmos foil. Vaporeon and Kangaskhan are the 2 foil cards that you get in the jungle theme deck. So if anyone bought an old WotC theme deck, and basically as far as theme decks kept going, there was always 1 foil card and then 59 other cards. So in base set, you had Gyarados, Mewtwo, I forget the others. Off the top of my head, I forget the others. But you'd get a foil card in there. And so because of that, those foil cards did have much bigger print runs than the other cards, because within booster packs, the foils are pretty evenly distributed, but the ones that go into theme decks have to have more copies printed because they're going in there. So there are actually uncut sheets out there that are just, half Vaporeon, half Kangaskhan, because this was a theme deck sheet. The same way that you can see occasional uncut sheets out there that are entirely base set Machamp, because that went into that 2-player starter set. So it would have been a sheet or 2 of the Vaporeon Kangaskhan theme deck sheet. It was most likely just whatever sheet was being printed at the time. They said, give us some of those sheets with this new foiling type to test it out. Because, it's whatever printing plates are already on the printing press. So that's where those came from, and that's why it's only those 2 cards from Jungle.
So the people that I believe, again, Dan, thank you, really great. Dan gives you all the details. I just give you the high level because that's all I'm capable of giving you. From people that I trust, I believe, and they believe that there was one sheet that was produced, half Kangaskhan, half Vaporeon. That'd be about 55 of each if you're counting. And then what happened to them from then on, no one knows. I will tell you that it's probably one of the most rare cards I've seen or not seen anything out there of. There's only been a handful, 2 or 3, that I'm aware of. And the people that were involved, like my new friend that ended up selling me the extra set of the Cosmos hollows for Fossil, they just knew that market and were always looking for those 2 cards. Fortunately, they came to me and were willing to sell some of those cards as I finished up acquiring these different hollow variants, and so I was able to acquire them. But very rare, hard to come between. And again, follow my theme here, coming off an uncut sheet back in the day. And so that sheet back in the day would have been a full production sheet with rounded corners and everything, because it would have been produced, as it was test prints or whatever. So that's how I believe those are. Dan, they're full corners, right? As you recall, I do. I think so.
I think they have the rounded corners. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Basically, both stories could be true. It could have come out as a sheet and been cut later. WotC production could have had them cut them as they were making them. It's entirely possible that either option happened. Weirdly, you talk about the Vaporeon Kangaskhan being super rare, there's only 1 sheet. But because of the fact there's only those 2 Pokemon on the sheet, the fossil set, which has 15 different hollows, even though there's more sheets out there, running the numbers, there would need to be 8 full sheets of the fossil Cosmos to make any individual Pokemon more common than the Vaporeon Kangaskhan, because you're only getting something like 7 copies of each Pokemon on a fossil sheet. So even if they had a few sheets, each individual Pokemon is still rarer than the Vaporeon Kangaskhan.
And I'm a believer that if you haven't seen, look, this is what we know. It's like Dan talked a few podcasts ago, or a year ago. Who knows, guys? Nobody really knows time anymore. Time is just a time warp situation, and then you got to do a dance back in his Rocky Horror Picture Show tattoo he's putting on his arm. So Dan, I have no idea what we're talking about because I talked myself out of it. So I was going to talk about B decks. I was going to talk trainer deck Bs, which they found this warehouse of down the road, and that made them less expensive than the A's as time went by. So no one knows that there's not a warehouse sitting of any of this stuff. But if you look at things, and we talk about a theory that things are going to generally come out because of the prices that are involved, unless something is not known of whatsoever, then these types of situations that I've described today are few and far between. And if, again, you'd think they'd be out there. Anybody can have a handful of sheets. It's not expected. So I think as time goes by and you haven't seen a ton of these, as Dan is saying, he's factually accurate, but I just believe, whatever those 55 were, there would be more of them. There would be more of each of those cards if more of them had survived through till today.
Well, let me say, because what I'm about to say is 100% speculation on my part. Because of that, I would be more inclined to believe that the sheet was cut at WotC. Because if you're talking about the fossils, at the time, there's probably only a few people at WotC who are allowed to take this stuff. It's probably a very, very small amount of high-level people who can take this stuff. So if you have a few sheets of these fossil, and there's, say, 5 or 6 people in the room, everyone's going to say, can I take a set? So they're going to take a set. When you cut the Vaporeon Kangaskhan, if there's 55 each, maybe it's still those same 5 or 6 people that say, can I have a set? And they get a set of 2 each, and then the rest get destroyed.
Right.
So the fact that we're seeing way less of the Vaporeon Kangaskhan compared to the fossils, even though by numbers they should be more common, that would make me believe the most likely scenario is that these cards were cut at WotC, and it's just that the same number of copies got out because the same amount of people were allowed them.
Yeah, that's speculation, but very interesting and makes a lot of sense. I mean, again, I'm not a big speculator, but I can totally see the logic in that completely. Okay, my last comments. I have one other uncut sheet that I was able to acquire. This one just came out of the blue. Somebody called and said, we've got this sheet available. And again, worked with some of my hobby friends to basically figure it out. And this is a Dan, I think it's a Fossil Cosmos whiteback sheet. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I think you got that before you got the regular backed Cosmos Hollows, I believe. So I remember you talking about how you thought you had the set because you had the Fossil Cosmos, and then realized that there was the blue backed version out there, and in your collection, you're always going to prioritize a blue regular Pokemon back over something that doesn't have a Pokemon back.
Yes, 100% correct, and I appreciate you refreshing my memory. So all I'm going to tell you about, I'm not going to get into details except to say, guess what, guys? An uncut sheet. Literally one of one. There's never been another one that's ever been found. And the little hint I'm going to give you on this, and I wish more people would watch these podcasts because they would find it remarkable, is, and before I even tell you this hint, what I'm going to tell you is Dan's going to link that other video. Go watch the video of the uncut sheets regarding to Cosmos and Disco on the base set, because I lay out everything from the trades I made to the money that I spent. And it's just, and the travel across the country with it in our car, so nothing would happen to it. So you'll really appreciate that video. But I got this sheet, and it was not only uncut, guys, it was rolled up. It was a rolled up sheet. And I'm not going to tell you any more than that, except to say, if you understand the machinations that we had to go through to get that sheet to unfold over the course of time in a way that was not damaging to the cards, so that now I can offer people these holo cards. It's one of the things that I sell the most. People are so interested because there's one sheet of these cards that are Fossil Cosmos holos with white backs. They're beautiful. They're not perfect because, again, the real stuff that was from those days, and if it's going to be rolled up, they're not going to be 10s. The best cards are 8s and 8.5s, whatever. But they're legitimate and they're authentic, and there's not a bunch of them. Literally every card ever coming out in this hobby has come through me. So The reason I wanted to do this, I want to provide some information. Number two, I wanted to provide some differentiation regarding the play tests and what is in my collection. Selfish reasons, because you're going to have these creators, as Dan has talked about and we've talked about, that are jealous, and are going to find any reason to, call me out and say, oh, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. They're not legitimate cards. I don't care. They're just jealous. They don't have what I have. I do my own collecting. They should do their own collecting. They should keep their mouths shut and worry about themselves. So,
and it's not the people we're talking about. It's not a case that they actually have a moral standpoint against these things. There's plenty of stuff in their own collections or on their eBay pages that came out through equally odd means. Like I've literally been there when some stuff has been handed out to some of these people. I know where it came from, and it's as dodgy, if not more dodgy, than some random uncut sheets. It's not a moral thing, but for them, it's simply buy mine and don't buy his.
Yeah. And you guys, I've said before, Dan is so right, but I've said before, accountability and transparency, my two tenets of life. I tell it like it is. Doesn't always have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be something somebody else likes. These cards are coming from uncut sheets. Figure it out. If I told you how many people have told me that the Fossil Cosmos cards that this person sold to me, a big influencer, not in good stead right now, but when he told people they were not from uncut sheets, they were from the factory, he was believed by those people. And now those people attack me. You're wrong. They came out of packs. They came out of whatever. No, they didn't, folks. The real stuff came off uncut sheets. And if you're willing to admit it, then you're authentic and you're transparent. And that's being ethical to people so they actually know what they're acquiring. And I think you get a lot more credibility by doing that, even if people will judge you and say, well, I don't think you should have had the right to cut a beautiful uncut sheet. That's your opinion. You don't have a right to sell a scalper box at 200. You should sell it at 140. That's your opinion. But I also like you guys to know exactly what's real as far as from our collection and what's going on here.
Yeah, well, that's a lot. I will say my uncut sheet was rolled up for a while, and I think it's finally flattened out. I've had it in a frame for 7 years or something now. I think it's finally starting to flatten.
Yeah, you have to do it slow and be patient, or else you ruin the card. So no question.
That's the last thing I have on that subject. Well, it was Law took it to either Jenny's or Michael's back in the day and just got it framed up. So it's just been sitting in the frame for a long time, so I think it's okay now.
What's it an uncut sheet of, Dan?
It's the regular Fossil hollows. It's the
KD?
most... Yeah, it's the most common uncut sheet because it's one that Watsy gave out a ton of copies of as prizes and as gifts for different things. But I believe they gave them out rolled up as well.
Okay.
Because the person I bought mine from said that it was still in the box that they got it in, which was rolled up in a long cardboard box. So
yeah. I actually have one. It's flat. It's in good shape as far as being flat, but it's got like scratches and all the hollows. I think I got it from an early collection I bought, and I've never been able to. I've never made an effort to go sell it. It's not part of my collection. It's just sitting in a closet straight up. So I know that sheet very well.
Honestly, the worst thing with those sheets is you have to keep replacing the elastic bands, because when Watsy had them, they were rolled up and they had elastic bands on them, which aren't that bad normally, but if you leave an elastic band on something for a long time, it goes hard and rots and sticks to the cards.
Yeah.
And so even if you're keeping it rolled up, you have to replace the elastic bands every few months so that they don't gum up and stick to the backs of the cards.
Any questions anybody has about any of this stuff, leave it in the comments. We have some new people that are making an effort to comment. I do not know if they're your real names. One of you, I think, is called Alice. One is called Katie. Again, boys, girls, I don't know who anybody is, but I just want to thank you for jumping in the comments, for making an effort, suggesting topics. It means a lot. I checked. We've done 14 videos. And again, I'm not supposed to check on any of this, but it's just who I am, and I can't deny who I am. 3 of them have more than 200 views. So, that's about as low a view count as you can get out there. Tell a friend, tell a foe, tell a collectors group, anything you can do like that. If you like the content, please, pass it around so we can keep Dan growing in the right direction. And thanks, and congratulations again, Dan, for 6,000 subs, and let's keep it moving.
And also, it's also worth saying, even though it feels like we've been doing this for ages, at least on my end, we have only been back for 2 weeks. Getting a solid 100 to 200 views on a 30 to 50 minute daily video, I'm happy with. Like I say, watch hours is where it comes from, and that's a lot of watch hours. You know, it would be nice to see the view numbers go up too, but we've got a solid amount of people watching this every single day, which I'm super happy with. But yeah, we're 55 minutes recording now. You're not saying anything else. Anything else you want to say can wait for tomorrow. So thanks again to Codes and Cards Pro for the tip on the TCG Player affiliate link. And yeah, we'll see you again tomorrow. Sorry this one was so long.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Koffee Talks with Dan Norton and David Person, with music by More Than Never and artwork by Lore Norton. A special thanks to all our Patreon members. Join us again next time.
But they don't want you to.